Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Academic Affairs and Educational Attainment Committee to order. Please remember, as Chair Mata said during the Finance Committee meeting, that only members of the committee can second a motion or vote on a motion. Superintendent Hoffman is with us, and we appreciate your being here as always. We thank you for taking time and for engaging both higher education and K through 12 in the kind of collaboration that you have really brought to us. So thanks for being here and thanks for what you do for us. This meeting is live streamed on the ABOR Live link on the website, if someone would like to go there and get the live stream. We have a full agenda this afternoon, including Arizona State University's request for approval of its general education program. The committee is going to engage in discussion with the issue of oversight of academic programs, where we're looking forward to as well asking not only staff at ABOR to go through the process that we use as a board, but also invite the provosts and others at the universities to comment on that process as well. Following those discussions, we're going to welcome Jim Rounds, president of Rounds Consulting Group, and Jim is going to present to us today on allied health needs in Arizona as a part of a larger study that he's engaged in dealing with labor force needs in the state. Right after the discussion with Mr. Rounds, the committee will receive a presentation from the University of Arizona on its proposed allied health programs. That will come a bit out of order today compared to where it appears in your regular agenda. Following the allied health discussion, we'll turn our attention to metrics and online metrics, including today a discussion of the University of Arizona Global Campus Metrics. As a reminder to everyone, the board holds President Robbins responsible for the quality of the educational program at the University of Arizona Global Campus. And that's why that comes to us today as a part of our discussion, which has been very broad with regard to online metrics. We understand that there's need for improvement in the quality of the educational experience at the University of Arizona Global Campus. And we can assure the Department of Education and accreditors that as a board, we will indeed hold President Robbins to improvement in the quality of those educational programs. We'll also turn today to Arizona State University's institutional university metric targets, as well as to a discussion of targets for online metrics. The University of Arizona is also going to bring forward a new program as a part of what we're going to do this afternoon too. So we'll get underway. That's just a brief overview of where we're headed. And we'll start with approval of the minutes. And I'd like to ask the committee if there are any questions or comments about the minutes from our last committee meeting. Hearing none, I move that the committee approve the minutes from the January 27th, 2022 Academic Affairs and Educational Attainment Committee meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion does pass. Item number 2 on your agenda today is Arizona State University's presentation of its request to establish its new general education program. I just want to pause for a moment before I turn to Provost Gonzalez to really present this. This is really a challenging issue, both for the board and for each of the 3 universities. As a board, we've made a decision here that we expect graduates of our 3 public universities to graduate as educated citizens, capable of participating in our democracy in a very constructive kind of way. That's why we've made the request of the universities that they really set up a kind of general education that indeed is quite interdisciplinary. And I think that's in part the challenge. Normally at our universities, the political science department presents a course in political science. The chemistry department does the same in its area. What we're asking people to do is not a trivial challenge. And that is because the understanding the institutions of democracy demands a bit of understanding of philosophy, politics, economics, social science, and law, among others. So this is a challenge to really make work. Before I turn to Provost Gonzalez, I'm going to ask Andrew Comrie to go ahead and make some comments about process with regard to general education for all three of our universities. Dr. Comrie?
Thank you, Chair Penley. So I just have one slide here to just refresh people's memories about where we are in the Gen Ed timeline. So if you can click to the next bullet there. So first of all, the board adopted the general education policy back in June of 2019. And big picture, a reminder, there are 32 credits in Gen Ed, and then there are specific knowledge areas that were listed as well as specific skills that were listed. And each university has to design a program that meets those requirements. That policy was revised in February of 2021, largely to clarify some details, particularly in the areas of American institutions and civic knowledge. Next click, please. The proposals from the universities have come forth sort of one by one. The first one was actually University of Arizona, and their framework was adopted in June of 21, and the first full implementation semester will be the fall of this calendar year, fall of 22. As you can see there, NAU's was adopted in September 2021, and the fall 2023 class will be the first full run of that system. For both of these, and I suspect the same will be true of ASU, there are some pilot programs happening before, but these semesters I've listed here, the first sort of full rollout. And then today, and then also at the April meeting, the board meeting, ASU will present their general education framework. And the idea there is that full implementation will be fall of 2024. Next click. I also wanted to remind you that there is a longer arc here, which is that once these frameworks have been, all three been adopted, and the universities are working on fleshing them out, then there will also be an assessment process that will be ongoing. And the three universities are working together on that. And the idea is to collectively measure what in fact students are learning and what they know, and assess the outcomes of the Gen Ed process. The actually first piece of news on that will be in written communication. We expect some data this summer because the group has been working on that, and then there'll be some of the other areas I've listed on the slide there, quant reasoning, civic knowledge, critical thinking, will come in subsequent years. So that's the arc of the process. And then one more thing, which is that as these become implemented, the universities, of course, will come back and present for discussion what their, in fact, fully fleshed out framework will look like once they've worked on the process and the framework that you see here. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Regent Penley.
Thanks, Dr. Comrie. Any questions or comments from board members about the process? There really is. I mean, at points, it seems as if we've accomplished something by having each university present this framework, but there's still, as the provosts know all too well, there's a great deal more to do. And the assessment piece of this, which we've really insisted on, but I will say the provosts and their staffs have really worked hard on this already, as Dr. Comrie has indicated. And without their collaboration, without their work on this, we wouldn't be as far along as we are at this point on the accountability piece of it. So I thank each of you and your staffs for what you're doing on that front. And with those comments, I'll turn to Provost Gonzalez.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that excellent framing of what we'll be presenting today. I'm going to be joined today by Vice Provost Ann Jones, Vice Provost of Undergraduate Education, who has been deeply involved in the details of ASU's efforts to address this redesign of general education, which, as you say, has been quite a challenge, but actually quite a very energizing enterprise for all involved here at ASU. It is my pleasure this afternoon to present for your consideration ASU's proposal to establish a new general education program. The proposed program is intended to succeed and replace the existing general education program at ASU, and bring us into compliance with ABOR Policy 2-210. My presentation will have 3 parts today. First, I will outline the process of how this framework was developed briefly. Second, I will introduce the proposed curricular framework, and then I will comment briefly on the next steps towards implementation. ASU's current general education program has been in place with only modest revisions since the 1980s. ASU began the process of revising general education before the adoption of ABOR Policy 2-210 and has been running a pilot program entitled Transformation since fall of 2020. Following adoption of ABOR's new policy, as I was preparing to assume the provost role, I created a 26-member ad hoc committee consisting of faculty, assessment staff, and academic advising professionals. That committee was charged with reviewing the existing pilot program and best practices in teaching and learning literature as a means to develop a new framework for general education that would better serve our students by being consistent with both contemporary scholarship and the ABOR policy. The structure that I'll present today was designed by that group, and a preliminary presentation of it was made to this committee in November of last year. The framework was also presented to groups of faculty and administrators, including the ASU Faculty Senate and stakeholders from the Arizona community colleges. Since our last presentation, ASU has used the feedback from those various stakeholders, including from our regents, to revise the framework. We also completed a series of workshops open to all ASU faculty, where we had actually an astounding high level of participation to define the learning objectives for the proposed curriculum. The result is the framework that I will now present, a framework that is both aligned with ABOR Policy 2-210 and reflective of ASU's unique identity as a public enterprise driven by our charter and our unique design aspirations. Before turning to the framework, I would like to pause to thank all the individuals who have been involved in this process. First, I'd like to thank the regents who created this opportunity for us to reconsider the academic foundation we are providing for all of our undergraduate students in Arizona. As anyone who works in a university knows, curricular changes of this magnitude are by no means easy, as Regent Penley has outlined already. You have provided the catalyst to speed this process. Second, I would like to thank ASU faculty and staff. Scholars from across the university have been engaged generously in this process, and many have commented that making new connections has been an unexpected benefit of this work. So could I have the next slide, please? General education is at the heart of the academic enterprise. It is a foundation provided to all undergraduates across the university. The goal of ASU's proposed general education program is to train students, regardless of their major, to step outside of their own disciplines, to think like others, to think like mathematicians, like writers, like scientists, like artists, like historians. To achieve this goal, the program that we are proposing is structured around 3 pillars. First, exposure to key knowledge areas. Second, development of cross-cutting competencies. And finally, assessment. This represents a significant change actually from our current system, which was based exclusively on knowledge areas. In the proposed program, students will complete a minimum of 35 credits of coursework. Required courses include first-year composition and a math course, as well as the specific number of credits from each of the 7 knowledge areas that you see on the slide. These are not the same knowledge areas you will find in ASU's current system. Indeed, they are inter and multidisciplinary areas that represent contemporary challenges, modern scholarship, the strengths of ASU, and Arizona's need for an educated and engaged citizenry. Each of the knowledge areas is defined in terms of learning outcomes. This decision explicitly connects the knowledge areas to assessment. Regular and rigorous assessment is essential to continuous improvement of any curriculum. Tight connections between our knowledge areas and assessments is intended to make such modifications and improvements possible, even in a large system such as ours. For example, based on assessment data, courses, learning outcomes, or knowledge areas that are underperforming can be reconsidered, revised, or even replaced. and regular review of all aspects of the curriculum will be included in faculty governance of the proposed program. At first glance, it may appear that because students take only a single 3-credit course in some of the knowledge areas, they will not have sufficient exposure to those topics. However, the knowledge areas of this proposal deliberately overlap and reinforce one another. The proposed structure was developed with recognition that pedagogical research shows that students learn via repeated exposure. For example, the math, quantitative reasoning, and science knowledge areas can be thought of as working in concert to develop related skills. Each has distinct learning outcomes, but those outcomes reinforce thinking in the other areas to improve students' abilities to think logically, to design experiments to test hypotheses, to construct models and arguments with quantitative and qualitative data, and to evaluate scientific information to make these decisions. In addition to the 7 core knowledge areas, the proposed program identifies 6 cross-cutting competencies that you can see on the maroon background on the right side of the slide. These competencies were crafted by taking into account career competency frameworks like the well-known NACE competencies, as well as the ASU's design aspirations. For example, self-reflection and lifelong learning is connected both to students' professional development and to ASU's evolution as an enterprise committed to supporting learners at every stage of life. Each and every ASU degree program will be expected to foster development of all 6 of these competencies. They are not restricted to the domain of any particular discipline or knowledge area, but rather cut across all of them. Students will develop them not just in courses specifically designated as part of the general education curriculum, but also in courses of their major. In fact, an assessment point for each will be determined in the required course for each of our majors to ensure that repetition. Our next step then is to focus on the implementation of the program. To account for the complexity of this program, implementation will occur in phases. To highlight a few considerations, implementation must take into account effects on enrollment in individual academic units, relationships with our Arizona Community College partners, updating of our extensive collection of digital assets embedded in online courses, and construction of assessment infrastructure to support the new program. To date, a timeline of key milestones has been created with the goal of all new students entering the new general education program in fall 2024. To support this goal, faculty steering committees consisting of scholars from across the university have been constructed to guide the work in each knowledge area. These committees are already working to define criteria to be used to determine whether courses will be included in the new program and to recommend specific assessment strategies. After securing your support to move forward to implementation, we will begin a number of tasks in parallel. These include the formal internal reviewing of curriculum for the new program, revision of courses, especially online courses, as our Gen Ed framework applies equally to our online program, and development of infrastructure such as academic advising materials, degree audits, the academic catalog to support the new program. And the last task includes considerable software development that will be necessary to run both the old and new general education systems in parallel and at scale as we transition from one to the other. Engaging the entire university community in this process is essential to its success. With the faculty workshops we completed this spring, we started to build the foundation for creating faculty communities of practice to support this new program. Those communities are expected to be essential to preparing and supporting faculty to teach in this new curriculum, especially in the knowledge areas and competencies that don't formally exist in our curriculum today. And finally, it is essential to develop a clear plan to communicate these changes to students. This is not just because we want to ensure that they know how to successfully navigate the new program, but also because we expect it will be a retention and student success tool for us. We are planning to modify our student-facing tools to highlight both learning outcomes and competencies across the curriculum at the levels of individual courses, major maps for particular degrees, and the university catalog. highlighting for students where and how they are getting key knowledge and developing career competencies, we think will help them more explicitly connect these abilities to preparation for their career goals while also facilitating development of their self-awareness of learning. So thank you for the opportunity to present this proposal today. More details on the knowledge areas and competencies were outlined in the board book, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Provost Gonzalez. Questions or comments from members of the board? Regent Manson?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much. I know we have been through multiple conversations and iterations, and I greatly appreciate your efforts to make sure that what we intended actually makes it onto the board. So again, thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure dealing with you both. Two questions. One, I just wanted to note the question I had and the concern I expressed regarding the civil discourse and civic engagement, and I believe that's been addressed through the addition and clarification. So I appreciate that as well. Is there any chance, fall 2024 seems like a long way off, and I understand the magnitude of what you're trying to do. Is there any chance that this could be implemented prior to that?
Right, Ann, I watched you on that one.
And it's like, not a chance.
But Vice Provost Jones has spoken.
And all you can see is her eyes.
It's a good thing, because probably weren't nice words.
So as Provost Gonzalez mentioned, we're actually planning a phased implementation. You may know that ASU establishes curriculum in any particular degree about a year in advance, which means that we are setting the curriculum for our academic catalog for the 23-24 academic year already right now. So to hit the 24 fall start, we have to have everything approved and actual new courses established. Right?
This time next year.
By this time next year.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Regent Herbold and Regent Pacheco
The
follow.
reason for the quick no was that when we get to the framework part where we'll lay out courses that will constitute each of these elements, that most of these courses are going to be designed fresh and new. Is that I assume that's a huge task. And is that the real problem in terms of all that work that has to be done to get the courses together that will fit these needs?
That's part of it. I'll say a little bit more and then invite Ann to join in as well. We expect there will be a combination of some courses that already fit fairly close, if not straight on. But there will be a need to be an assessment of those courses. Other courses will probably be revised to fit, and others will be developed anew, as well as sort of being able to identify courses that no longer really fit within this framework. So it's a significant amount of coursework involved.
Very helpful.
Pacheco?
No, I'm just enjoying my dessert.
Oh, okay. I thought you had a comment or question.
Ann, were you going to say something?
Well, in terms of implementation, Provost Gonzalez is right. We actually are working on a data-driven approach in concert with the registrar to look at all of our existing courses and how they map into the new curriculum. But that means reviewing each and every one individually as well. And as she mentioned, trying to do it in a way that doesn't cause economic chaos, right? The economic model of the university is largely based on gen ed. And so we're using data to decide how to move each course so that we don't cause a disastrous disruption.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Regent Dave?
Thank you, Chair Friendly. One of the questions that I had when this was first presented was, how will the design aspirations of this, which are wonderful, really make its way all the way down to the professors that are teaching these courses? And so there was brief discussion of a training program. I just wanted to follow up there to see if there's any thoughts.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion on this large team that's been working on this in terms of creating communities of practice, which is something we haven't had, which would be a really wonderful way to strengthen the quality of all that we're doing. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about what that might look like.
Yeah, so we took the first steps towards doing that this spring as well. As you know, I think, ASU's existing general education structure has really emphasized the individuality of the faculty member in the course. So that this is a philosophical framework shift in expecting people to really be focused quite narrowly onto specific learning outcomes. To start to introduce that kind of philosophical shift, as Provost Gonzalez said, we actually ran a series of workshops open to the entire ASU faculty this spring to invite them as well to contribute to the development of the program. And we had extremely enthusiastic participation, and faculty volunteered in droves, which never happens, to sit on steering committees, to actually develop the materials that could be shared across departments to create that kind of professional support and development that you're asking about.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from committee members or members of the board? If not, any additional comments, Provost Gonzalez, that you'd like to make?
No, just again, thank you for the level of engagement on this. We have had multiple meetings to really make sure we fully understand, the spirit of this exercise, and we really do think that it's going to improve the quality of our education, so we appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for all the work that's already been done. I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval of Arizona State University's proposed general education program. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion does pass. Next on the agenda is a discussion regarding the board's delegation and oversight of academic programs and other academic decision-making. And I believe Chad Sampson is going to make the presentation. Chad?
Thank you, Chair Penley. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with the members of the committee. The board has been asked to engage in a discussion regarding the existing policy. There is no board decision today on this policy, and this is a rarity. We do not generally bring items before the committee that do not have an action item on them. However, Director Arnold, along with the leadership of the board, thought it would be a good opportunity to have hopefully a robust discussion with the committee and the provost around the delegation of academic decision-making. I have been tasked with the responsibility of walking the committee through the current decision-making framework outlined in this very readable table that's behind me. With that, there are a couple of things that with Chair Penley's indulgence, I'd like to say. First of all, academic decision-making, that is approving the academic locations, the campuses, the sites that our universities reside on, academic programs, that is the academic degrees and that we offer, and then academic organizational units, the colleges and schools in which we offer them, reside with all fiduciary boards. Every fiduciary board in the country that is over a university engages in this activity. They approve the programs, and largely this is, not to wax too elegant, but it is the first among equals among the three missions of a university, that is to educate, to do research, and to provide service. And so this is at the core of the board's responsibilities. So therefore, we require the universities on numerous occasions to come forward with different academics decisions to be made. However, this board does not require them to come forward with all of those academic decisions. There are other fiduciary boards that do. Other systems require every academic decision to come through a very bureaucratic process and receive board approval. Our system is more complex. The reason for the complexity is because our institutions are complex. They offer degree programs across multiple institutions internationally in multiple modalities. They're incredibly complex institutions in among themselves, and so therefore we've got a complex policy. My hope is that going through this policy will bring some clarification and prompt some provost conversation regarding why we bring items forward. I'd like to start with just the first item on the top, unless there are initial regent questions. New locations within Arizona, if you look, we require each new site, and site is defined as I colloquially define it, as boots on the ground. If you have individuals, any employee, faculty, or staff on a site, it must come before the regents and receive approval. And we do require that the board approve that. That is new to this policy. Under Chair Manson, we made that when current chair of the board, Manson, was chair of academic affairs, we made that change to make sure that all sites, regardless of how large, if they had employees, come before the board, so the board was aware of that. A site would be, for example, ASU's Mesa location. It is not a campus, but it is a site. It will have programs there. It has employees there. Comes forward. Establish a new location outside of Arizona. Regardless, we now have universities operating in multiple locations. U of A's microcampuses is a good example of that. When they establish a new location outside of the state of Arizona, it must come before this committee to receive approval. And then we have what this is a new term coined, novel combination of an existing degree and an existing location within Arizona. This is important because the universities have multiple sites around Arizona, and as provosts are charged with doing, they are charged with optimizing those sites, providing the best programs in the best location for these students. That, however, sometimes creates competition and creates the need for discussion among the universities. So if a university decides to move one of their existing program, this did not used to happen, but an existing program, say U of A, I'm just going to use U of A as an example, Lisa, if that's okay, decides to move one of its engineering programs from its Tucson campus to its site in Yuma, it will need to discuss and have a conversation with the other two universities through their provost, providing notice to that. If there is no concern, then they can immediately move. If there is concern, it comes forward to this board to have a discussion and make a decision on that. That is a new. Any questions about that? I'll stop. Seeing none, I'll keep going. I thought I'd get a question on that one. What is not stated here is novel degree programs outside of Arizona. This was debated, it was discussed among the academic council, and it was decided to create a safe harbor. That is, if one of our universities would like to offer an existing degree that has already been approved by this board that is existing on one of their sites now, and they want to move it, forgive the, again, colloquial term, offshore. If they want to move to one of their national sites or one of their international sites, it does not need to come before the board. We do not see that there would be the necessary requirement for collaboration with regard to competition among the three universities, so therefore they are free to move that without the board receiving knowledge. The board, however, does get a report every year. It's called the API, the Academic Program Inventory, every year that the universities submit where those degrees programs are, what site, what campus, and how it's being offered. We are expected to introduce a new report, the annual program inventory report, until we can come up with a better name for that. Regent Manson has been asking for that in this coming academic cycle, this new academic year. That is the hope. Hope springs eternal. Yeah, I'm happy to answer further questions about novel programs outside of the state of Arizona. We also delegate to the executive director's authority the disestablishment, renaming, or transfer of an academic program. We have long held that it is important for the board to know when a university makes a large shift, transferring a program from one academic unit to another, or disestablishing, that is, eliminating an academic program. They need to provide the board an update to that. The board has delegated that responsibility to Executive Director Arnold, who receives a report, signs it, and then we record it in our office. To date, I've received this question from a few regents: how many academic programs have been disestablished? Since 2018, we have had 17 of those come to the board. Some have come as part of reorganizations that this board has actually voted on, and some have come directly to Director Arnold to be disestablished. Director Arnold, any comment on that? We require material revisions to to existing credit requirements. That is, if you are going to increase or decrease the number of credits a degree program requires, they must bring it to the board. The reason for that is twofold: to ensure academic quality and to maintain a weather eye on the number of credits it takes to obtain a degree. Those have been historically the two rationale for having those changes come forward to the board. In recent history, as I've gone back and looked at this, they've all almost been with regard to 90-30 programs with the community colleges, which we've found to be a good use in encouraging more community college transfer students. I'm going to skip over a number of these. As you can see, where the board responsibility, I'm happy to answer any questions to them, but my time is now quite short. I do want to mention new certificate programs. The board has delegated that authority to the university presidents and through them to the provost. As of late, the board does not approve any certificate program or any program less than a degree. So an associate's degree, bachelor's or graduate degree would come to the board. Less than that is delegated to the universities. And the universities can move unilaterally to assign those.
Chad, could you pause on that one for just a moment? As board members saw in your book, we have a large number of certificate programs, perhaps much larger than you realized until you looked at that list. I guess I would just turn to the provosts and ask any one of you to really describe the process you use for approval of a certificate, and then how do you assure the quality of that? And I use an anecdotal example of a graduate student stopping me the other day and talking about his new program at one of our 3 universities. And he said there was a certificate available. And I said, "Are you going to take the certificate?" "No, it doesn't have the right courses for the work I plan to do." So now that's an isolated example, I realize, but I'm curious about the overall process and assurance of quality. Any one of you?
I'm positive we all have quite different processes, but
Oh, provost folks, you're so brave.
I love that we're talking about this because it's one of my sort of pet passions, is making sure that we have a rigorous process of review for material that will be in any certificate by faculty. And I think that that's an important principle to uphold. So in fact, our certificate programs come through the same review process as degree programs do, through the same committees for review. And we ask at every level that the faculty assert that the quality of the curriculum is worthy of having the Block A stamp put on it. So all that happens is that the process is truncated at a different level, as it were. You know, it doesn't keep moving forward through the last end of the normal process for degrees. I would, if I might, though, also raise a sort of a separate point that came up when we started working on this topic, which is that we have for-credit certificates and we have not-for-credit certificates, and I imagine that my colleagues have exactly the same situation. And I think that this document is dealing narrowly with for-credit offerings, not for credit offerings, which are...
So the document understates the number of certificates, perhaps.
I think that is plausible that there's an understatement on that side that we might want to pay attention to. And I can think of a recent issue that caused some discussion between ABOR and the legislature, which was in the not-for-credit realm. And ABOR has not traditionally had a process whereby we so much as inform you of what we're doing in the not-for-credit realm, and I might propose that that would be helpful to improve communications on that front.
Regent Manson, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, and my question actually will apply to all 3 of you, is that my biggest concern in the certificate or badge or whatever arena is that we are providing something that is of value to the student
Yes.
relative to the cost to the student, and frankly, relative to any value in the job market, because I believe that that's where these are intended to make a difference. And when I looked through the list of certificates, there were a number of things there that I couldn't personally attribute any significant value to. And so if there's no value to it, I kind of wonder why we're doing it.
If I might respond to that, sometimes, particularly with undergraduate certificates, so for credit certificates, it's actually much more of a pathway to helping undergraduate students organize and structure their undergraduate curriculum more than being particularly additive to the degree they're already seeking. So they may be doing a major in say they're doing a major in Spanish and they pick up a minor in Portuguese, they're doing the same number of credit hours. It's not actually clear that that would necessarily lead to an additional economic benefit in the long run. It might, but it might not. But what it does do is it helps them navigate their undergraduate degree structure. It gives them a pathway that's really clear. It gives them a way to move forward and make choices about, I'm going to choose to do these courses in this order. So it adds structure to their undergraduate learning much more than there being a particular economic value. But I will say in that case, there's not particularly an economic cost to us to deliver that. They were going to do the same number of credit hours. They were going, we were going to teach the same number of credit hours. It adds structure to their pathways. So, but you're right, there are other certificates that are clearly to do with adding a job skill, a job relevant skill, for example. So I think there's two things going on there that end up looking the same when we look at, they're all certificates, but they have two different purposes.
So are you suggesting, so in Uav's case, I know there are two specifically, there's the visiting student and there's the study abroad certificates.
Right.
And are you suggesting that those really are simply a way of putting kind of bumpers up in terms of choosing course curriculum to get you through to be able to do that particular activity?
Right. It's saying that if you want to do, study abroad, then this is the preparation we'd like to see you do before you do or after you do your study abroad, right? And then to structure all that and to pull together a sequence of courses, we call that a certificate. And that gives structure to the advisement process and to the student choosing the courses, if that makes sense. So there's no particular added cost on our part.
Right.
It's an organizational benefit to both the student and the advisement team to have those things packaged up. Now that of course is different from, I'm going to do an undergraduate certificate in data science and add it on top of my degree in French.
Correct.
Now that's very clear that that's motivated by being able to go out into the job market and say, I have two different skill sets I want to bring to the table.
Provost Gonzalez?
I'll just we follow a very similar process for approval. That it goes through the same approval process certificates do. We just don't, we don't then forward to ABOR in the same way that we do with degree programs. And we're looking at these very questions when we're reviewing it. What is the value added? What is the purpose of it? And we ask our units to articulate those ideas. And I think in some ways, there are some certificates that prove to be quite valuable. You might have a psychology degree, but decide to do a specialty in addictions, and so that makes you employable in a particular sector, as an example. But I would also say that students vote with their feet. And so oftentimes we do have a large number of certificate programs that are available to students who might pick and choose them as they suit their particular needs. And we are motivated to provide for the unique needs of many students on many pathways, but they're not necessarily highly enrolled. There may be, it does raise the question, maybe we should do a better job of thinning those out over time as well. And letting the market sort of drive what is useful to our students.
Provost Pugliese, do you want to add to that, or either the process question or the question that Regent Manson asked about value?
Well, I'll just corroborate what my colleagues have reported. We too put our certificate programs as well as our minor programs through the same sort of curricular design and review process. So it goes through multiple levels of engagement with faculty. And then I would just add that we also take a look at our certificate and minor programs during the course of our 7-year academic program review process, where we typically are taking a look at the academic programs offered by an entire academic unit. And that's where we may have the opportunity, to consider what has been, the value of this particular, curricular feature, and, how much has it served students in terms of enrollment. And we try at that point to perhaps weed some of the ones out that don't, draw as much interest. It's always hard. As I like to say, that curriculum is really a matter of accretion in universities more than it is one of ongoing cultivation in the sense of narrowing it down. I'd also add that I think that, when I look at ours, that there has been an ethos at NAU in regard to undergraduate certificate to center those opportunities on things that would have professional value. And some of our most highly enrolled certificates, as you can see, are really tied very closely to certain kinds of professional opportunities and credentials. At the graduate level, that's a little less clear because the certificates sort of function as minors do at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, so that those taking master's degrees or PhD programs can gain a certificate in an academic area, like say women's and gender studies, when it may not have an obvious link to a professional endeavor. But that is also a way, for instance, for those attaining a PhD or a master's degree, even to gain qualification to teach at a community college in an area of concentration. I think too that I just would corroborate that I don't see these as having any kind of cost to us. That they're made up of courses that would otherwise be a part of our curricula, either the general education or majors and graduate programs.
Thanks very much, Provost Uagc. President Robbins.
Thank you, Regent Penley. I think the provosts have covered most of what I wanted to say, but not to introduce more time of discussion here, but maybe for a later discussion, is the concept of the stacking of certificates en route to a degree. Probably more applicable in the graduate side of the house, but there is definitely a move afoot in some institutions as a pathway toward degrees. But obviously, those would come through a board. But just as a word of caution, you're right to be paying attention to the certificates. I think the pathway you've taken forward to date is the right one. But I do think that the certificates, as all the provosts have pointed out, are starting to gain traction for a variety of different reasons by students.
Thanks, President Robbins. And I think you've really, I think, pointed why we had to have this discussion. His certificates really are of more interest to people today from a point of view of the workplace and perhaps even for structuring curriculum, as Provost Folks explained in the undergraduate program. My guess, board members, is that we have to ask ourselves at some point in the future if we want to come back to this certificate question, because with the increased emphasis on certificates, it may well be that we need to really look at the types of certificates in a more directed way, per Provost Folks' comments from the very beginning of what she had to say, and really examine whether indeed we're delivering what both undergraduate students and graduate students really want, recognizing that we still may choose to leave the approval process, much as it is, at the university level, but with an understanding both by the board and a wider discussion of the purposes of these certificates and whether indeed we're really have the right process in place internally to deal with them. Chad, any other comments on certificates, or can we move on?
If it's okay, given the time, Chair, I'd like to move on to just walking through a couple other items on that table that are important. The board will note in the table that it approves all new degree programs, whether they be undergrad or grad. The board, every new degree comes to this board for approval, for the committee for recommendation and the board approval. What we have noticed, and we've had a discussion with the provost about this, and there is much to be discussed and much to be designed around this, is with large programs, large new degree programs, and for example, the U of A's new physician's assistant program. The U of A is required under accreditation to hire a director and start working with that individual and building the curriculum around that new program long before it is ripe to come to this board. There's a couple of issues around that. One is the university is then doing all of this work on the hope that this board approves that process. On the flip side, the board, not to presume what the regents are feeling, but the board may feel once vast resources and effort has been expended towards a new program, and then they come to the board at the end and say, will you approve it? It puts the board in a position it may not want to be in. So we need to, and we have discussed the need to have a preliminary discussion, I don't want to call it preliminary approval, but some preliminary discussion with this board regarding certain large programs, veterinary medicine, physician's assistants, maybe other allied health programs. And wanted to put that out for the board's discussion and need provost comment on that.
Any provost want to comment?
I'll just say when this was first raised, there was the question about what type of program it would apply to, because certainly we're always in the business of, trying out new ideas and bringing in new people who have big visions, and some of it turns out and turns into something quite significant, and other times it doesn't, and you may get something else out of it. So I would hate that this to creep, and now everything that we're starting to do that sort of might just be very preliminary, we want to bring to you, because that wouldn't be a good use of your time either. So I think trying to understand to what this is really being applied, I think would be useful.
Well, and to your very point, Provost Gonzalez, I don't think we want to set interposed processes that really restrict entrepreneurial thinking in the universities either. On the other hand, there are certain major programs, let's take veterinary medicine at the University of Arizona, where we had lots of preliminary discussions over several years before students actually arrived. And perhaps that was appropriate because of the very nature of the program and the fact that we've been highly dependent upon UC Davis and Colorado State University for our veterinarians prior to the development of that program. But for most programs, I agree with you. We don't want to stifle entrepreneurial thinking at all. I don't think. Other comments, Chad?
And then the last one would like to bring before the board and make sure the board is aware that any joint degree program with another university is required to come before the board. We bring that up because we've seen that lately. Just the last meeting, NAU came forward with its university in Shanghai on a joint location in the hopes of bringing joint degree programs forward, and that will need to come forward and receive board approval. And we're happy to stand for questions on that.
Other questions to Chad or the provost about this? If not, thank you very much, Chad. Oh, I'm sorry. Regent Reidenauer.
Thank you. Well, I couldn't help myself. I was going to let this go. But it's about opening other locations in Arizona and the definitions around what is a new location in Arizona? What if you notify the other university, other university says we have concerns about that. And then, if those concerns are somehow continue, that the board has to get involved and approve that program. So, that came up not too long ago in Chandler, and I think it's going to come up over and over again. So I'm not sure that procedure it works in today's, we've had other university presidents say, well, we need open borders, or, I want to be a free range chicken, or whatever. Don't fence me in.
We're killing those around the country, Bill,
I
because of bird flu.
know. Maybe that's not a good analogy, but building into that has to be some kind of procedure that it's immediate. In other words, I notify somebody, now we're getting legal, I have to respond within 5 days. You know, it has to be a material adverse change to a program that we're offering. I'm just not sure going forward with NAU and offering other programs in U of A, that is workable. So I don't have an answer to it. It's just comments that I know we've made changes in it for the better, but why don't we just scrap the whole thing?
Chair Penley, may I respond?
Sure, Chad.
And I do so with some trepidation, and I'm looking directly at my boss. The regents do not like that provision. I would safe to say the universities do not like that provision. I adore it. I will, and let me explain why. Regent Ridenour, you make some very good points, and we have a 7-day time limit when a provost, and these 3 provosts here have been excellent at responding to each other and getting back to it. But we have a tickler system that when one provides notice, the others get back quickly with any concerns or problems. The reason that was put in there was because as universities moved in unilaterally to each other's spheres or began competition without notice, there was lots of conversation and consternation that would come back to certain regions and would come back to me. And so we've had to bring that forward once. It became very clear to me the regions expressed their displeasure of that they did not like to be put in that position. I don't think the universities liked it, and since that time, there has been peace in the valley. And so with that is, we are always welcome. I do not want to be seen as bureaucratic. I do not want to be seen as stifling, but we are always welcome to look at different models. Right now, what I would offer, and the provost feel free to disagree, is they are working very well together. And I don't pretend that it's this one provision that does it, but that one provision provides a framework in which they can work. That being said, Regent Ridenour, we will always take it under advisement, and we'll put it back on for discussion at Academic Council at a better way to do it.
Regent Shubin?
Well, I think we've talked about this a couple of times, but my suggestion here has been to establish a set of guidelines, things that we agree upon, foundational statements like you can establish a program, but it can't be at the expense of the program of another university. There are a set of principles that could be developed to provide more context for the decisions the universities are trying to make, not just a phone call. Oh, by the way, that place down on 3rd Street up in Flagstaff, we're going to bring our entire medical school there, or whatever it is. We need to do it. If we can give a little bit more context to what our concerns and thoughts are in this collaboration that we work in, we do collaborate very well, but yet we still compete. And I think a set of principles, even if we keep Chad's beloved program in place, which we all don't like, so maybe we've found the problem here. Anyway, my point is, I would highly suggest that the rest of you, since Bill and I are leaving, get right on those principles, will you?
I agree.
We will take that
Thank
under
you,
advisement.
Regent Shubin, and thank you, Regent Ridenour. Unless the provosts tell me differently, I think it's mostly working right now. I mean, I've seen some problems over the time I've been on the board. I think generally we've moved to resolve those issues when I've seen problems. Provost folks could speak to that because I've dealt with her specifically on this issue at one point or another. But I think it's mostly worked. Yes, Provost
If
folks.
I might add, it's actually extremely helpful to us, and I think my colleagues would agree to, we feel like we're all informed about where the 3 institutions are heading and what they're doing, and that helps us to steward our own institutions forward. So I agree that it's been a beneficial process, and I have to say Chad's managing it very well.
Thank you, Provost folks. Executive Director Arnold, did you have a comment?
I have no further comments.
Stop it, Chad.
All right, right, Chad, anything else on this issue or others? If not, thank you very much, Chad, for bringing this issue. I think at times it's important for all of us just to remind ourselves of what we've delegated, what we've not delegated. And I think, as all of us know, so many things come to this board already. It would not be in our interest to slow things down in terms of development of new programs, in terms of providing students in the state of Arizona with more options. On the other hand, there are times when we need to work together. And perhaps we've just been discussing one of those ways in which we work together, for the most part, successfully. Okay? Yes, Regent Manson.
I think one of the things that drove this conversation was it was really easy to identify what was what when we were doing standard academic programs all within our own sphere. And now that the universities have grown up in a way, and they're very entrepreneurial, and they're doing very, very many different things in different manners and with different connections, I think my biggest concern is that the board doesn't find out about things in the media, or suddenly something is fully developed and we didn't know anything about it. And so I don't want it to become a barrier to the entrepreneurial, mission that you all have to survive. At the same time, I think it's very important that, even as a matter of just knowledge and awareness, things come to us so that we're aware. I'm not interested in every germ of an idea, but there were a couple of things where I think, Nancy, we saw a picture of you in
Cairo.
In Cairo. It's like, wow, what's she doing in Cairo? And so I'm not saying there's anything I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It surprises us, and I don't like to be surprised. That's really my point. And so, it's a little bit like my questions about the medical school in Australia earlier. I didn't know anything about it. We're approving tuition, and so it's obviously happening. And so it's just, it's a matter of communication more than anything else. It's not a matter of trying to slow you down or put rigor around it. I'm just looking for more information.
Thank you, Regent Manson. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Provost. With that, we're going to turn to a discussion of allied health programs with specific attention to the University of Arizona's request to the board with regard to new academic programs in the area of allied health. We'll begin this discussion by asking Jim Rounds, President of Rounds Consulting Group, to come forward and provide some of the preliminary information that he's been working on with regard to workforce needs in Arizona, with specific attention to allied health issues. I would say that I've known Jim for a long time and have worked with Jim, but that would make him sound a little older than he actually looks, so I'll just leave that alone. But Jim, turn to you for a brief explanation of the report that we've all read. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. When I saw Chad's initial slide, the black and white slide with a bunch of yeses and nos on it, I knew it would be really easy to follow. And then when I heard that he was liking something that nobody else did, I thought, I can't mess this up. But that was the most brilliant political response that I've ever seen. So he's been taught well over the years. Everybody has seen our memo, I'm assuming. I just wanted to hit on a couple of the key points in this really brief PowerPoint. When we were tasked with just taking a look at what the supply was and the potential demand for certain healthcare occupations across the state, there was emphasis on Southern Arizona, but to do it statewide, you had to do it by county. To some extent, we wanted to make this also a little bit consistent with some of the other analyses that we've been doing for you over the years. It's one thing to say we would like to generate, this many additional workers in a particular category compared to, say, the U.S. average or some other measure. But what's always been missing until the last couple or 3 years, where people really started responding to calculating what a return on investment might be, is to convert that goal and monetize it and try to see what's the economic benefit? What's the fiscal benefit if we catch up to what our goal is? And so longer term, I would actually encourage you as you continue to refine your strategic plans and you have goals. In many cases, you can help cue those goals and emphasize things by monetizing those as well. And so this is part of what we did for this, but this is also the same approach that we take when we try to defend the new economy initiative requests from each of the universities when you start to go through the appropriation process. And again, lawmakers have been very responsive to the argument of, here's what the universities would like to do, but here's the fiscal benefit. And by the way, that fiscal benefit so much exceeds the cost of the program. If you truly do want to operate government like a business, this is how a business would invest. And so just telling the story sometimes can get through and help get funding and help push our economy forward. So let me just cover some quick slides. I don't have a clicker. Somebody else can advance it. So the occupational categories that we were asked to look at, and these we can look at any ones that you want at a later time, but it was physical therapists, occupational therapists, physician assistants, and audiologists. What we found is that all 4 of the categories were underrepresented in Arizona in 2020 if you bench it against the US standard. But we have to keep in mind, we're benching it against a standard that is also considered fairly low in terms of providing enough workers in these categories. So when we do these comparisons, these are the bare minimum numbers. These are very conservative. If we are benching it against where the US probably should be, then we may need even more employees in these categories. If you take a look at 2030, 3 of the 4 categories, when you compare projections for the US and projections for the state, we're still underrepresented in terms of count. And I'll show you the one that wasn't. But I also want to keep in mind that when state forecasts are put together, they're put together based on the assumption that certain things are going to continue. We always revise our forecasts, whether it's from MAG or the state or anything else, when we do our analyses based on where we think things are going in the future. So if you think that if you do a model and it focuses on the last 10 years, but you know there's an inflection point in the data and something might change, you have to make some adjustments. So when we took a look at the state's forecast for growth in these healthcare categories, we thought they were a little aggressive. And so we didn't want to make the adjustment for this particular assignment because it was a very straightforward request. But I wanted to note that the statistics, when I show you the 2030 numbers, look a little off. And that's why we're recommending that if you're doing any planning, you focus on the discrepancy from 2020 rather than the 2030, which is where you would normally look at if you felt that the numbers were more reliable. Next slide. And these are just select slides from the memo. We can focus on what's highlighted in yellow. So for example, for physical therapists in 2020, Arizona, so statewide, a job shortage of 1,028, Southern Arizona, 293. The next one, occupational, 537 and 182, physician assistants, 217, 249, and audiologists, 147 and 20. Go to the next slide, please. In 2030, the numbers are a little bit more favorable. In fact, if you see statewide for physician assistants, we are not trailing the US average. And again, keep in mind, the reason we like to use a US average on a lot of these higher ed statistics is we like to make the point that here are huge economic benefits of just being average. If we can just catch up with being average, there's significant economic benefits. We should be striving to be even better than average. Now, that sounds like a negative political statement, but it's not. Arizona's doing quite well in many economic categories. We're one of the few states that still has a lot of room to move upward, especially with educational attainment. I believe educational attainment's the biggest risk and the biggest opportunity in the state for the next decade and beyond. And that's what's going to differentiate us from staying in the top 5 in a lot of these categories versus maybe falling into the 10 to 15 ranking statewide if we don't continue this economic momentum. Next slide. So if we monetize the additional jobs just to catch up with the US, statewide for physical therapists on an annual basis, the state would collect an extra $4.8 million. Physician assistant isn't listed there because it's already indicating from the more aggressive state forecast that we're going to be catching up to the US average. But if you take a look at the numbers, total for the state, we're dealing with significant numbers that are going to exceed what you will need to invest in terms of dollars to start to catch up with this US average. That's what is considered a positive return on investment. That's how we need to be thinking about this. I like to even go further and say we're spending $1 of state tax revenue. So we're spending $1 of taxpayer money. What does it take not to increase economic output by $1? Wrong measure. That's where a lot of people make a mistake. What does it take to get that dollar back to the state? So that's how a business would invest profits and they would look for additional revenue, not gross revenue, additional profits coming back. So we're looking at it in the same way. So even the 2030 number data comparison is still fairly positive. Can you go back one more? Okay, so the same thing except for 2020 where it does have the extra values for physician assistants. Big numbers again. So as you look at this information and you try to decide to what extent do you want to be pursuing additional investment in these categories, I had 2 takeaways. One, as of 2020, so the most recent hard data that you can trust, we're still fairly behind. Even though the forecast is showing that the gap's going to close by 2030, I do not believe it is going to close. I do not believe that we're going to be able to maintain our overall economic momentum in a lot of our high wage categories because we're at the point now with a lot of big business locations where we may have to send businesses out of the country to train their workers, or we have to provide significant incentives to train their workers. That's fine for now, but it's not fine on an ongoing basis. We need to start being more effective, efficient with our money and have this flow of new business coming in with the outflow of qualified individuals going forward. So when it comes to the healthcare categories though, if we discount the 2030 value when we focus on 2020, I do not see any scenario that might be proposed by this group where you're going to be overproducing in these categories. In fact, I don't see any scenario where any program on workforce that's being considered in the state, any of them, is going to be producing so much that we are going to have excess workers in a category. We don't need to, on the university side, we don't need the universities to produce this or something else. You need to produce this, and you have to have other partners. You have to have the community colleges. We have to have better communication with K-12 so that we can be advancing these students further, making better choices about where to go, trying to keep costs down, making sure the economy continues to go forward, because if the economy slows, you're not going to have any revenue to invest in these programs down the road. One builds on the next, builds on the next. This is a key component. This is one category within workforce, but this is the same story that I tell on the broader workforce discussion. So I don't believe there's going to be a duplication of effort. I do believe that this is going to be needed. I do believe that the healthcare sector is where we're going to see a lot of major economic advancements, and that's a story for another time. But I'm very bullish on Arizona, but we're only going to hit these forecasts if we invest. I'm not going to hit my personal forecast for my business if I stop investing and stop training people and investing in equipment. You're not going to hit your goals unless you can get the same kind of support. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Jim. Any question before we quickly move on? Yes, Regent Manson.
So you addressed my concern, which was if the gap is reducing, are we 15 years from now overproducing? You've said no, but I guess I don't understand a little bit why you're discounting the 2030 numbers so heavily.
So the 2030 number has a very aggressive forecast for that occupational category in the state's forecast. You can't have that kind of an aggressive forecast at the status quo in terms of funding and support. So unless additional funding is put in and that we advance that particular healthcare category, you won't even be able to get to those numbers. So I feel like if you have the investment that you would need, that you all would calculate internally, you're not going to fully fill the gap. You're just going to get to where the forecast currently resides, which is still a shortage. And there'll be enough lead time. We'll be able to tell over the next decade. Arizona potentially could change a lot in terms of its economy over the next decade. We'll know year by year where things are going, but for your longer term planning, I'm very confident that full investment in these areas, depending on your limited resources and where you have to allocate them, I don't believe that you're at risk.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. Yes, Superintendent Hoffman.
I was curious why speech therapists were excluded.
Why speech therapists were excluded? Because we had a list that only had 4 items.
It just kind of stood out to me because typically you see occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists, like clumped together when we see the 3 fields.
I agree with you on that, but these are the ones that have been coming up the most. I would like to see a bigger effort among the entire education continuum to be looking at these types of things in more detail. In fact, one of the items that I recommend for K-12 clients and just friends that we volunteer and help on occasion, that we need to reduce the individual asks down to digestible units, calculate these ROIs and help prioritize, and then it's easier to sell them. But it would be fun to talk with you another time about that, actually.
I can't guess why you asked that, Superintendent.
I'm sure
I just can't guess. But thanks for asking. We're going, before we take a break.
Regent Ridenhour.
Oh, I'm sorry, Regent Ridenhour. Before we take a break, Regent Ridenhour is going to speak.
I think he's helping my free-range chicken argument that we need all of this, and the universities are a perfect group to provide that. But you were talking about investment. We have to invest in these, and there's all kinds of provisions before the legislature or proposals. If you had to make the investment, how do you make the investment to get the best outcome in these programs?
Well, you have to start with a good idea. And so let's assume that it's a good idea. And I say that with respect to many people that bring ideas to the Capitol. Not all ideas are good. But if you have a solid idea, then the economics should work out, which means you have to demonstrate it, though. You have to go through that monetizing process and explain why you wanting to ramp up a program is going to generate additional revenue, because you're going to be pushing additional students through that are going to be in high demand, and they're going to be making an extra $20,000 more a year than they otherwise would. You train them over a short period of time, and then they make that extra money for the next 40, 50 years, and it's compound economic development. But you, again, with limited resources, you have to queue it. When, as a business, as my own business, I have to queue investments as well. What I would love to see is, as you have certain goals within the different universities at ABOR, I would love to see a little bit of this occur as well, because it'll help you queue what are some of the most important goals. So I wouldn't have a goal saying, want to make more money next year than you did last year. Or I might have that goal, but in the footnote, it would say, first do it this way because the math is going to work out, then train this individual to take over for some speeches so you could do more marketing, et cetera, et cetera. There'd be a little bit more detail behind it. I really like the goals that have been established, but on the priority ones, just a little bit of monetizing I think could go a long way, and it'll give you ideas for additional requests at the legislature going forward over the next, I guess, just indefinitely.
Thanks very much, Jim. Before we take a quick break, if it's okay, I'd like to have the University of Arizona present item number 13, which is a decision item for the committee. And Provost Folks, I believe Dr. Dake is going to present this. Is
I
that
believe
correct?
he is.
Dr.
I hope
Dake?
he's with us.
Yes, thanks, Regent Penley, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to commend Mr. Rounds for giving us such an excellent and comprehensive report that provides a real estimates about the healthcare workforce needs across the state in the future. And I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of 3 programs that we believe can help us face those shortages. Next slide. Just briefly, and I'll run through this rather quickly, Regent Penley, but we obviously know that we're a fast-growing state. We have 1.5 million Arizonans over the age of 60, and 9% of those are under the federal poverty level. And it's a fast-growing population over age 65, with a 50% increase in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, we rank right in the middle, number 24, in terms of states and how we serve the elderly population. Next slide. This is important when it comes to healthcare, and especially key when it comes to primary care delivery. And we have a shortage in this state, as Dr. Rounds told you. Right now, we have a 563 primary care physician shortage, but by 2030, primary care physicians expected to be close to 2,000 shortage. And these allied health professions, I think, are really one way that we can help address these shortages. You see the map of Arizona with the 15 counties and the number of primary care physicians that are going to be necessary to relieve the shortage going forward. Next slide. First program is physician assistant. It's a master's program. In 2021, over 150 University of Arizona graduates applied to PA programs in the state and across the country. The NAU PA program had 2,000 applicants for 50 positions. And Arizona meets right now just 50% of its primary care physician needs. We have this shortage, as I showed you earlier, and the anticipated growth of that shortage. And physicians assistants can certainly help address, again, the severity of such a shortage. Right now, we rank in the bottom 10 states in terms of primary care delivery at 78 physicians per 100,000 population. The US average is 92. Next slide. The requirements for this degree: 26-month curriculum, 14 months didactic, 12 months clinical, emphasizes interprofessional, inpatient, outpatient, community-based experiential learning. And we hope to attract a very diverse student body that's reflective of Arizona's diversity and who plan to practice in Arizona. This is exclusively based in Southern Arizona, in Tucson, and expected to really focus on providing help to the southern part of the state. Next slide. The next program is the Doctor of Physical Therapy. As you may be aware, there are no current physical therapy training programs in Southern Arizona, and our state has the 4th lowest practicing physical therapy FTEs per 100,000 population. This demand is going to grow, as you saw from Mr. Round's projections. And right now, NAU had 900 qualified applicants for its 100 positions, of whom 200 were Arizona residents. So again, there is a need for students throughout the state. Next. This will require completion of a bachelor's degree before entering this program. It's a 3-year full-time program which emphasizes clinical reasoning, community-based experiential learning, interprofessional skills and communication, and in total it's 109 credit hours. Next slide. Finally, for information, we're also starting a certified nurse midwife program. Arizona has a very high maternal mortality, especially alarming in certain parts of Arizona, where American Indian maternal mortality is up to 70.8 per 100,000 live births. This is, again, an extreme. And there, again, 2 counties have no obstetrical care, and 2 more that have just minor or really rudimentary obstetrical care available. There are currently no certified nurse midwife training programs in Arizona. Next slide. This builds on programs within the College of Nursing and within the College of Medicine and the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. The midwife certificate is an extension of the APRN program, and again requires 34 credits and 900 clinical hours. Next slide. In closing, I just wanted to provide a little glimpse of what the opportunity cost is to us. What's the return on investment on this new economy initiative? All three of these programs are new economy initiative success stories for all of us. These programs will help solve unmet state needs by addressing critical health workforce shortages and expand educational opportunities for Arizona students. We aim to have 50 to 70% of the grads practice in Arizona, and this will certainly help some of these professional shortage areas and will help stabilize Arizona's rural and critical access hospital and clinic finances. We hope this will generate additional economic impact for Arizona via this new job creation. Next slide. Finally, we expect these programs to have an estimated total program startup cost for all three to be $10 million. We expect that this will generate a combined program annual net income at full student enrollment projected at $1.5 million per year from tuition revenue. This will provide a permanent income stream that can be reinvested in research, teaching, and clinical activity and faculty. And this reinvestment will to the annual program net income at $1.5 million per year will help increase our HERD expenditures by $6 million annually based on the demonstrable multiplier impact that we know exists for this external funding growth. I'll close with that slide and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dake. Just for clarification, folks, the programs that are before us are all the programs that Dr. Dake described, except the midwifery program, which is a specialization within a board-approved program that's already come before us some time ago. So any questions to Dr. Dake or comments to Dr. Dake? Regent Manson.
Thank you. Dr. Dake, I couldn't find in the documentation anywhere the expected enrollment for these programs. So I know that that is dependent upon your accreditation and what you apply for, but could you give us the number for both the DPT and the PA?
Yes, thank you, Regent Manson. For the PA program, we will start with 30 students, then go to 35, 42, and by year 4 be at 50 students, and that's expected where we will stay. For the PT program, we will start with 50 students.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had was related to the Southern Arizona need. It was obvious within Mr. Round's report that Southern Arizona is in desperate need of these particular professions. And in our conversations, you have made it clear that you believe that you could, in your programs, provide the clinical locations and rotation within the Southern Arizona region. And so I would like to have you tell the board that that is actually accurate. And then I think what I'd like to do is I would like to ask that we include that in the motion to approve these programs.
I think.
Any comment, Dr. Dake?
No, I think that's our intent, certainly, and we've communicated that before. So I am in total accord, Regent Manson.
Perfect, thank you.
Other questions about these programs or comments? If not,
Regent Schupman.
I'm sorry, Regent Schupman.
I'll just make one comment here. For those of you who are Stephen Covey aficionados, the abundant philosophy applies here. There is so much need. We don't want to hurt NAU in any way, shape, or form, or ASU in any way, shape, or form, but there is so much here that it's incumbent upon us to act, and I fully support this proposal.
Thank you very much, Regent Schupman. Other comments? Yes.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. You had projected that you would hope for 50 to 75% of students to stay in state. How do we incentivize and ensure that these students that we're training are actually meeting that need, especially in Southern Arizona?
Well, I don't think it's possible to guarantee or ensure that they will stay in Southern Arizona. There are certain incentive programs that we can think about starting up that involve perhaps tuition payback, et cetera. We've done that with primary care, with medical students with great success. But in the end, we trust that all these students are going into this, and many of them went through our selection process, are going into these specialties to take care of underrepresented, traditionally underserved areas, and we fully expect that they will want to stay in Southern Arizona. But we will certainly look for incentive programs to make that happen. And there's just not an ironclad way to ensure that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Dake. I completely agree with you. There is no way that we can require that or insist on it and assure it. Just for a comment here, the folks at Northern Arizona University know that I've encouraged them and will continue to do so to expand as rapidly as they can their allied health programs, both the ones that are in Maricopa County as well as Coconino County. I think from Jim Round's data, it's evident that we have high need for exactly the point that Regent Schupman was making. So I would just encourage NAU to proceed as we have urged them to do for some time now. With that, I move that the committee forward to the full board for approval of the University of Arizona's request for new just specified allied health programs that will be delivered in Southern Arizona. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion does pass. Thank you, Dr. Dake, for your time today.
Thank you, Regent Penley, and thank you to all the regents.
We're running about 20 minutes behind. We're still going to take a 10-minute break. So it is almost 2:15 at this point. We'll reconvene at 2:25 and see if we can pick up our pace just a bit for the remainder of this meeting. Thank you.
Nice.
So glad to have you.
Next on the agenda is a discussion with the University of Arizona regarding online metric targets for the University of Arizona Global Campus. And I'm going to turn to Craig Wilson, Vice Provost for Online and Distance Education, to make the presentation for us, along with Provost Folks. Craig, where are you? There you are. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Today I'll be presenting a brief slide deck on the University of Arizona Global Campus. You'll notice some areas are in alignment with online programs across our ABOR universities, and clearly some are not. Next slide. To get started, here's a slide that describes the 6 online metrics. With respect to these metrics, items 1.2, student continuation and persistence, it is now 1.3, okay. is yet to be finalized, but UAGC's information will be presented. As for item 1.6, which talks about UAGC rankings, in US News, UAGC is not ranked. So next slide. With respect to completion rate, on this slide, you'll notice student successful course completion rates are aligned with those of ASU, NAU, and UA, whose ranges are from about 85 to 89. And this completion rate really is comprised of A's, B's, and C's earned by students. Next slide. With respect to pace of progression, this slide also shows alignment with existing ABOR University online programs. Here, UAGC students took just over 12 credit hours per year, which is close to that of ASU, NAU, and UA, whose ranges were 13 to about 14.5 for the year. Next slide. For continuation and persistence, on this slide, UAGC's continuation and persistence is far from that of our ABOR institutions. At 37.8, it's about 20 percentage points below ASU, which is 57%, 34 points below NAU, which is at 71%, and 29 points below UA, which is at 66%. This is clearly an area ripe for improvement, and UAGC is forecasting gains over the next few years, but with respect to those gains, I recognize those may not be as high as some would like them to be, but this is certainly a process that takes a period of years, as opposed to what you would expect in a traditional brick and mortar where you have 4 years, students expect to graduate within 4 years. In the online space, these are non-traditional students, and typically they take about 6 to 8 years. So any changes that we make to that is going to take time to work its way through the pipeline to see any real gains that would be showable. So what you're looking at here is what is considered a realistic look. I recognize it's not ideal, but this is where the projections are putting us, at least for right now. And we're throwing everything we can at trying to improve this process, because we do recognize this is a serious Achilles heel that needs direct attention, and it needs attention right away.
Pardon me, Craig. Regent Herbold?
Have you done analysis of why this occurs?
So that's an interesting question. If you look at that percentage, it's 37.8%, and it's been about that same for the last 5 years. If you unpack it, you'll see that the graduation rate has been about 24%. And that's kind of in line with where we find the rest of our institutions. Again, these are part-time students. Where they start to fall down is in their third year. The third year stop out, if you look at the actual, in the packet, you'll notice that's where it's about 40%. And where the other institutions are in the teens with their third year, University of Arizona Global Campus is at 40%, and that's a big Achilles heel. So when we look at that, we recognize that the continuation is also an area where they're not, so they're sort of lopsided, right? Continuation for the other three institutions is high, whereas continuation at the global campus is low. Then when you get to the third year stop out, that's where the other institutions are low, but they're high. So in other words, they have too many students that are stopping out at the third year. These are the types of items that we know and we recognize are very big problems with the University of Arizona Global Campus, but not problems that are insurmountable. These can be fixed. These will be fixed.
But still, I'm curious as to why. Why does this occur?
You know,
Compared to,
Regent
we've seen other
Herbold,
statistics, coming out of ASU that are a lot different than this.
excuse me?
I say we have seen statistics in this area from ASU, for example, that are coming out a lot different than this in terms of continuation.
Regent Herbold, I would agree that the other three institutions, again, their percentages are different at the stop out points and at the continuation point. And I think that what it's indicative of is more time and attention paid to the proper advising of students, helping them stay on track and on course to complete their degrees in a timely fashion. I think those are areas for improvement that necessarily need to be done as quickly as possible. So some of the tactics that might be used at the global campus, those tactics would need some revisiting, quite frankly. At the University of Arizona, as well as the other ABOR institutions who have online programs, we've figured out a way to work our students through the pipeline so they can stay on task and get their degrees completed. That information share would be really, really helpful to the global campus so that they can, in fact, make some of the necessary changes so that our students that are going through that pipeline don't get stuck in a rut where they're not getting to the end goal, and the end goal is graduation.
Craig, I think consistent with the questions of Regent Herbold, I, as one board member, I certainly expect a much better performance here. I recognize, and you and Provost Folks and I've talked about it, these are not easy things to turn around quickly. On the other hand, we know from the behavioral research that hard goals that are somewhat realistic, produce more changes in behavior than easy goals. And when I look at that line right there, that doesn't look like a hard goal. And because it isn't that different than the current situation. So I know this is a discussion item, but I guess what I'd like to see is for you all to come back at some point in the near term and give us some different targets than the ones you have here. Ones that represent tougher goals that are likely to really reorient behavior internally here to really drive the result that we want in the longer run. We're with you on this. This is not anything other than alignment with what you want to do. But I guess on this particular set of goals, and perhaps on some others too, while I don't want to stop your presentation, I want to hear your presentation. I'd like to hear tougher, harder goals that will drive a change in behavior. And with that, Provost Folks no doubt has comments. Regent
Well,
Herbold.
isn't this the area that the feds, especially the Department of Education?
Yes.
This is it.
This is
in
it.
terms of the heavy marketing up front, lure them in, get their money, because they're going to pull out anyway.
Yeah, exactly. In my view, we have to speak with you that we have the same expectations that you have and the Department of Education has for improvement here. We're all aligned. The question is how we deal with that. And you all are the ones that can do it, not us nor the Department of Education. But with that, I'm going to pause here and turn to Regent Shootman.
My question is, we're looking at the behavior of our current universities versus a totally online university that just converted to become part of the University of Arizona family. Do you have comparative information with other totally online institutions? How far behind are we from other similar successful online universities?
Yeah, there are some statistics out there for similarly situated institutions. I'm going to get into that a little further in the presentation.
Okay.
But to give you a precursor with respect to graduation, you'll find that the global campus at the University of Arizona is pretty similar to that of the global campus of Maryland, pretty similar to that of other, again, thank you for pointing out, Regent Shootman, about the 100% online environment. It is a different animal, but there are certain things that our traditional online programs can lend to that. So I'll tackle that a little bit later on.
Chad, you just sent us the online metrics for ASU, and I think those numbers are different than our on campus as well.
Right.
That is correct.
Yeah, yes, thank you. The online numbers are significantly different in most cases from the traditional, as they should be. You're dealing with a very different student, different age groups. I do believe that when we look at a metric for graduation rates, we can get closer to looking at some more comparisons to what a traditional campus might look at. But we can talk about that later. I would like to point out with the UAGC metrics that their completion rate is fairly consistent with the other institutions' online programs. It's the continuing rate that is causing their numbers to be significantly lower. And I think I know what one thing has to happen is you look at their numbers, 191,000 students compared to ASU at 98,000 for this particular reporting period. Those numbers will flesh out as UAGC becomes more part of U of A and they integrate it more. I don't think you'll see 191,000 students in the future. You will see large numbers, but part of the reason that continuing rate is down is because of those very, very large numbers. And I have looked at University of Phoenix and some of the private for-profit institutions, and they certainly do not perform any better than what we see UAGC doing as they migrate into U of A.
My point. Thank you.
Okay, Craig, why don't you proceed?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Penley. Next slide. Okay, so on this slide, with respect to terminal degrees, what you're seeing here is about 11 percentage points behind ASU with respect to faculty that have terminal degrees and doctoral degrees, about 12 percentage points behind NAU, and about 25 percentage points behind UA. So in essence, we're bookending UA on one side, UAGC on the other. And clearly, this is still an opportunity for improvement with respect to faculty attainment, faculty holding terminal and doctoral degrees. Next slide. Okay, so at first blush, this slide is a bit jarring. There's no other way to get around that. UAGC's benefits eligible faculty being at 11% can be a bit hard to digest, especially when you compare it to our ABOR University Online programs, which hover between the mid-60s and mid-70s. But I urge you to consider two things. First is the operational model. Second is how UAGC compares to similarly situated online universities that also have low percentages of full-time faculty. Under UAGC's model, they are able to prepare students for workforce and beyond by having a large number of instructors that are actually in careers students aspire to. This real-world knowledge is an important asset to students' learning experience. Second, when looking at their peers, UAGC's percentage of full-time faculty is well in line with those of their peers. For context, consider the following. At Maryland Global Campus, it's 5% full-time faculty. At Purdue Global, it's 19% full-time faculty. At UMass Global, it's 12%. At UArkansas Grantham, it's 9%. At Colorado State University Global Campus, it's 5%. Of special note on Colorado State Global Campus, while their full-time faculty rate can be considered very low at 5%, their online bachelor's degree programs were ranked by US News at number 13 this year and number 10 in 2021. So it's possible to have a full-time faculty rate that is much lower than our traditional ABOR universities' online programs and still be highly ranked by US News. To put this in perspective, ASU was ranked number 6, NAU was ranked number 59, and UA was ranked number 7. On the subject of national rankings, although UAGC was not listed by US News rankings, it was listed in Newsweek's 2022 inaugural online rankings at number 133. So Newsweek looked at the top 150 programs across the country, and UAGC was ranked number 133. Next slide. So in closing, as non-traditional students continue to move from the margins to the middle, they will become the new traditional students, seeking numerous educational ways to enter our universities and to learn. This eventuality necessitates a re-examination of our processes and measurements to meet the needs of this growing student population, which is already a third of ABOR University's enrollment, as noted in the ABOR fiscal year 2022 enrollment report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig, for the presentation. And thanks for the numbers about the campus that I started in Colorado, by the way. I started that campus for the reasons that all of us know. We have a very different set of students who need an educational opportunity. And that's what Colorado State University Global was intended to do. It's what UAGC is intended to do, is to meet a very different kind of students. But I believe that we do you a favor and UAGC a favor by really calling on you to really raise your standards above the level that you have right now, to set tougher targets. And I really believe that as a board, we need to send a message to the Department of Education, its San Francisco office, its Washington office, as well as to WASC, the accrediting body that comes out of California, that we fully align with you and with them in setting high standards and high expectations. And that's the very reason that I'd like to see you return and really talk about those targets in a way that I was trying to mention a few moments ago, and that is with tougher goals, tougher targets, tougher expectations that I believe will help to drive the kind of changes that ultimately you're going to need and the kind of expectations that all of us have for a quality experience for the students that are a part of UAGC. Comments from other board members? Yes, Regent Dave.
Thank you, Chair Penley. One question that I have is around, it's a similar concern that we see not in online, but just in higher ed in general, which is that oftentimes you have certain groups or demographics of students that become marginalized. This is an issue in online, and I know that for our institutional metrics, we have what we call closing the achievement gap metrics. Is that something that can be explored in online? I don't think that, again, this is not really specific to U of A and might be applicable to all three universities or online programs rather.
Yeah, I think it is. Thank you, Regent Dave. I think it is. The main point here is that with the online learning and the delivery thereof, you're able to actually reach out to these students who might not feel, first of all, they won't have the time to come to a campus, but they might not feel as welcome on a traditional campus for a variety of reasons. Maybe they do feel marginalized in some respect. In the online space, you're given the opportunity to bridge gaps where the students who might be in one part of a state or one part of a country where they're not finding a fit, so to speak. Now those students can be coupled with students on another side of the state or another side of the country who can be that fit. So there is an opportunity for, and again, this goes to, there's an old model called Aston's IEO model where you look at the inputs, the environment, and the outputs. And that environment is so important to students' ability to continue forward with their learning. And as some would say, it's equally, if not more important than what they're receiving in the classroom because of the ability to persist. Those are the types of things that I think every online program, I know at University of Arizona, but I would say that also across my colleagues at our ABOR institutions are well aware of and really place front and center. With UAGC, this is an opportunity for us to share that information, that knowledge, and that passion. Again, they certainly are doing a great job with, as mentioned earlier, bringing them in. It's getting them through the full pipeline. And these are the things that they're examining as we speak. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig. I'm going to turn to Jane Kuhn now, who's going to discuss online metric targets for Arizona's public universities. Jane?
Thank you, Chair Pinley. I don't have a presentation. We have seen 5 of those 6 metrics and the targets for those 5 metrics multiple times. What I would like to talk about is the online metric 2 that we have tabled a few times, and we are bringing that back, and we have changed that from student attrition to the student continuation and persistence metric, the one that we just spent a little time with UAGC on. We have agreed to report this as a point in time, a group of students that have enrolled in online over a period of years. So I am going to use ASU as an example, and they are in your online book that you have here. And so, for example, with ASU, for the academic reporting year 2022, we looked at the population from 2016 to 2020 that started as an online, came into the online program and enrolled anytime during those 5 years. ASU had 98,000, a little over 98,000 students during that time period. So then we broke it down into completions and continuing and stop outs during that period. What happened to those students? We really wanted to get an idea of student behavior. So you'll see with ASU as the example that they had 56.8 continue or complete, and that was broken down into 28.1% of them completed, which that means they completed all the credits towards their degree. Again, a graduation rate, we need to look at a different metric for that. Those that continued over that 5-year period were 28,000 students. Then we looked at stop outs. What is happening to the continuing and the completions, and what is happening to the rest of those students out of that 98,000. And what we found with ASU is that 12.6% of them stopped out in the last academic period. They did not enroll in any online term for that last academic period. Then we looked at 2 years, and they had 10.4% of those students, or a little over 10,000, that stopped out for 2 academic periods, so 24 months they did not enroll. And then again for 3 years or more, how many did not enroll at all during that 3-year period or longer? And that was over 19,000 students. And with that, we would like to see the stop outs decrease and the continuing or the completions increase. That would be the student behavior that we would like to see. There are several variables that impact this. One would be enrollment. As their enrollment continues to increase, we're going to see some variations in those percentages, particularly like with ASU, who we've all unfortunately heard about a hypersonic bomb. Well, missile, ASU is like the hypersonic online program in the state, right? They have grown very rapidly and they have done a very, very good job of it. So we would, in order to really get a good measure, we would like to see fewer stop outs and more continuations and completions. And we have NAU's numbers and we have U of A numbers, and they are not too far apart, although the NAU and the U of A programs are significantly smaller. And the U of A program actually did not switch to, they changed the way they were entering students into the online program in 2016. So their data is not quite a full set yet. But I think that all the institutions are doing a really good job with this, given that they're all very new in online. Online has been traditionally something done by private for-profit institutions. The public sector has gotten into it in the last couple of decades. And so things like student success measures and programs and things like that, they are still very young and early in the stages of figuring out how to have those students persist and continue to close those achievement gaps. They're still learning about how to get them closer to completion and about their enrollment behavior and their retention, so to speak, behavior. So I think given a few more years of collecting this data, we will probably come back with a different way to measure online. And as other public institutions get into this space and we start seeing how they're measuring student success and graduation, we'll learn a lot from that, and we may come up with better measures, or we may choose to stick with these measures. So with that, if anybody has any questions.
Thanks very much, Jane, and thanks for disaggregating the data in the way you did to explain the stop outs and the lack of continuation. Comments or questions? Regent Manson.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, we're being asked to approve these metric targets going forward. And I noticed in a number of these instances, it really looks like we aren't looking for significant increases in performance, that things are either status quo, we're looking to maintain what we're doing, or in some cases, even not expecting to do as well as we have done in the past. And so I'm curious why, you know, it's perhaps part of the same question, why our targets aren't more aggressive in terms of improving our performance in the next 3 years. I'm not a big one for flat targets.
Right, and I would defer that to each of the provosts. The online leads are not here, so they can't answer that question, but yeah. Oh, well, yes, Greg is here. He can talk about UA and UAGC.
I know I'm new.
Which I think he's
raise your hand,
he
Greg.
has heard you loud and clear, yes. And before they respond, I would say some of it is a function of their anticipated enrollments, right? And the time that it takes an online student to complete their degree. So for example, ASU and probably UAGC, as their numbers are so large, it's going to be harder to move that percentage a great deal. When you look at UA and perhaps NAU, you might be able to move the needle a little bit further with those percentages. But if any of you would like to comment, Provost Craig?
Thank you, Jane. Regent Manson, I think one of the things that we recognize is that, let's start with student progression, you know, how many credits students are taking in a year. That's probably one of the areas that we recognize we don't have a lot of control over because of the lives of the students. And if a student transfers in with about 60 credits, I mean, even if they took the 12 credits every year, it would take at least 5 years. And we know that so often is the case that our students, they have to stop out for a reason. There's a reason that they're taking these degree programs online in the first place. And that reason might crop up again, whether it's a job change or a family situation, what have you. And so to place a target on that, to say, well, we'd like to get them to 16 or 18, I mean, that's, as much as we might like to do that, we recognize that that's not the reality of our students. The other area that might be interesting is the 86% or so for the pass rates. And again, 86%, once you cross, it's like saying that if you're in the U.S. News and World Report and you cross the top 10, once you get to the top 10, it's really difficult to get to top 1. I mean, I think, of the three of us, I think ASU got to number 2. And just staying in the top 10 is, you recognize that this is where, any given time, any one of us can be switched around. And just to be in that consideration block, that's the major aspect. Of course, going back to what Chair Penley just mentioned about the, having the higher aspirations for your targets, we'd love to say we want to be number 1. And we do. I'll just say that. We do want to be number 1.
We'd love to say it,
but we recognize that that's going to be a difficult, as my grandfather used to say, that's going to be a difficult road to hoe. So those are the things for us internally. That's where we'd like to target ourselves. But in a public setting, we'd like to be a little bit more grounded, and be able to under-promise and over-deliver.
And I do realize this is really our first stab at this, and so I'm a little less concerned because I think what we're looking for is trends, and until we have some time to actually look at the data on a routine basis, I just want to make sure that we continue to look at this because it is new, because this is the first time we've developed these metrics, that we continue to look at them on an annual basis and decide whether or not we have the right goals here, because I'm not sure that we do right now, and it may just be for lack of really tracking this historically. Yes.
Regent Herbold.
One of the things I'd urge you to do is to, and maybe you're doing some of this, but there's nothing more valuable than exit interviews when somebody quits. And most organizations put a lot of effort into this because you can learn so much. And the more we can get some fundamental research on learning about the behavior of these kinds of students, the better off we will be, and in fact could put us in a much stronger position versus our competition. So money in this area would be extremely well spent to really understand what's in their head. It is time consuming to get, but incredibly valuable.
To that point, thank you, Regent Herbold. And to that point, we put together a survey for our undergraduate students that asks those series of questions each year. Every off year, we do it for the undergrads. And now we just introduced that same type of survey to our graduate online students to get into those more sort of, I don't want to say nuanced areas, but areas where you're not going to capture it on your standard surveys for your brick and mortar students. So we're in that direction, we're in that space. But I think to your point about the exit interviews, that's something that we can certainly take back with students. We reach out to students, our advisor block and our team reaches out to students to figure out, well, why aren't you coming back? We're getting that. But I think that the further out that student gets, the harder they are to reach. They're not returning emails, they're not returning phone calls. And the students who you are probably more apt to be able to reach are the students at the 1 year stop out. And our team is spending a lot of time and energy trying to make sure that we are at that students, for the 1 year stop out, that we're actually reaching out to those students. And when it comes to the ensuing years, we still have a drip campaign where you keep the emails going just to keep the contact, just to let them know we're still thinking about them. And then we'll still make periodic phone calls to see whether or not we can still engage, because sometimes the student might have gone through maybe an operation, a medical operation, and they just didn't want to talk, didn't want to reach out to anyone, regardless of how often we tried to reach them, and they just needed space to recover, to heal, and then they'll come back. And these are the things that, again, this isn't something that just our institution does. My colleagues, whether it's Phil or Gayla, I mean, we're all doing the same things, and this is just an opportunity for us to let you know that we take what you're saying to heart, and we're definitely moving in those directions.
I would just like to, I'm sorry, Regent Duvall, quickly add that we could add some complexity to these metrics that would give us some better ideas about how particular age groups might behave that are online, because there are certainly differences between the behavior of a traditional aged online student versus an older online student. And we could break it down by number of credit hours that they have transferred in, and look at how a online student that comes in as a new student or with only maybe 15 credits behaves compared to that online student that brings in 60 or 65 credits. We chose not to do that kind of complexity in these particular metrics, but those are things that we can certainly begin to look at and determine if those would be better metrics as we move forward.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to just force us to go on here, folks, because we are now at the end of the time for this committee meeting, and we have probably another 45 minutes to go, which we're not going to get to. But I would like to move that the committee forward to the full board for approval of the proposed Arizona University's metric targets for online student continuation and persistence, originally adopted by the board as the online attrition rate metric, but going forward will be known as the online student continuation and persistence metric, with the provision that the board receive revised, more aggressive targets for UAGC. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion does pass. In a couple of minutes, Christian, can I ask Christian Osmenya to come forward, please, for the next item? I think we've all talked a lot about the Arizona State University metrics. Unless there's some question or problem, I'd rather you just make a quick opening statement, and let's see if we can get these approved in a few minutes.
Sure, thank you, Chair Penley. These, as you said, we've talked a lot about this. These are nearly identical to the metrics that were presented to the board or to the committee in January. Following that committee discussion, we did add one metric related to the Fulton Schools of Engineering, related to U.S. News and World Report rankings for undergraduate programs. In your materials, you'll see that we've set a set of goals that are essentially aimed at getting to the top 25 in that ranking by 2027. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Christian. Questions? If not, I move the committees forward to the full board for approval Arizona State University's institutional university metric targets. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thanks very much, Christian. My apologies for being so swift on this one, but we have discussed this to a great extent, so I appreciate the brevity on this. Because of the time and because, I'm sorry. We need to do 8. All right. I thought we needed to do 8. Okay.
No, we don't. No, we don't.
We do not?
This is the BIOS. We're going to do that at the board meeting.
Okay, all right. Then we will table the remainder of the items on the committee agenda. We will address them at the actual board meeting, so we won't lose those, which is important for an organizational unit for ASU, for a set of programs from NAU, and with apologies to you two provosts, that's the way we'll handle that at the board meeting. Any comments or questions from members of the board or members of the committee? If not, the other items are tabled and we are adjourned with this particular committee. Thank you. That's okay. I know.